'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief, and I in my cap, had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there rose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky. So up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then, in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. Bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying a finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. but I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
$1.87. That was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealings implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87. And the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating.
While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, take a look at the home, a furnished flat at $8 per week. It did not exactly beg your description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the mendicancy squad. In the vestibule below was a letterbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring.
Also, there was a card bearing the name James Dillingham Young.
The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to $20, though, they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever James Dillingham Young came home and reached the flat above, they were simply called Jim.
And greatly hugged by the spouse of James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished crying and attended to their cheeks with the powder rag, then stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and they had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. Della had been saving every penny they could for months, with this result.
$20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than they had calculated. They always are.
Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Many a happy hour Della had spent planning for something nice for them. Something fine and rare and sterling. Something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honor of being loved by Jim. There was a pier glass between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a pier glass in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing the reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of their looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly, they whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Their eyes were shining brilliantly, but Della's face had lost its color within 20 seconds. They rapidly pulled down their hair and let it fall to its full length.
Now, there were 2 possessions of the James Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been their father's and their grandfather's.
The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across the air shaft, Della would have let their hair hang out the window some day to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts.
Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out the watch every time they passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy.
So now Della's beautiful hair fell about, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below the knee and made itself almost a garment. And then they did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once Della faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went the old brown jacket. On went the old brown hat. Eyes sparkling brilliantly, Della fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street, stopping where a sign read, Madame Sophronie, hair goods of all kinds. 1 flight up, Della ran, panting. Madame, large, too pale, chilly, glared. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della.
I buy hair, said Madam. Take your hat off and let's have a sight of the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madam, lifting the mass with a practiced hand.
Give it to me quick, said Della. The next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Ransacking the stores for Jim's present, Della found it at last. It surely had been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, for Della had turned them all inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was even worthy of the watch. As soon as Della saw it, it was clear that it must be Jim's. It was like them. Quietness and value. The description applied to both. $21 they took it for, and Della hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on the watch, Jim might properly be anxious about the time in any company.
Grand as the watch was, Jim sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that they used in place of a chain.
When Della reached home, their elation gave way a little to prudence and reason. They got out their curling irons and lit the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love.
Which is always a tremendous task, dear friends. A mammoth task.
Within 40 minutes, Della's head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made them look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy, looking at their reflection in the mirror long, carefully and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, they thought, before taking a second look at me, they'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with $1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the chops.
Jim was never late.
Della doubled the fob chain and sat at the corner of the table near the door that Jim always entered. They heard footsteps on the stair away down on the first flight, and turned white for just a moment.
Della had a habit of saying a little silent prayer about the simplest everyday things, and now whispered,
Please, God, make Jim think I am still pretty.
The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. They looked thin and very serious. Poor Jim, only 22, and to be burdened with a family. They needed a new overcoat and was without gloves. Jim stopped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of a quail.
Jim's eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that Della could not read, and it was terrifying.
It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that Della had been prepared for. Jim simply stared at Della fixedly with that peculiar expression.
Della wriggled off the table and ran to Jim. Jim, darling, Della cried. Don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you.
You've cut off your hair, asked Jim, laboriously, as if they had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor.
Cut it off and sold it, said Della. Don't you like me just as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?
Jim looked about the room curiously. You say your hair is gone, they said, with an air almost of idiocy.
You needn't look for it, said Della. It's sold, I tell you. Sold and gone, too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered, but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?
Out of the trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake, and then held Della tightly. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year. What is the difference? A mathematician or wit would give you the wrong answer. But the Magi brought valuable gifts. But that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from their overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. Don't make any mistake, Dell, Jim said, about me. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that could make me like you any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a while at first.
Nimble fingers tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs, the set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoiseshell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful, vanished hair. They were expensive combs, which Della's heart had craved and yearned for without the least hope of possession.
And now, here they were at last, but the tresses that should have adorned the coveted adornments were gone. But Della hugged them to their bosom, and at length was able to look up with dim eyes and smile, and say,
"My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little singed cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen their beautiful present. Della held it out to Jim eagerly. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of Della's bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it."
Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and smiled. "Dell," said Jim, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just at present. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now, suppose you put the chops on."
The Magi, as you know, were wise, wonderfully wise, who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents.
Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication.
And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in a flat who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house.
But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that of all who give and receive gifts, such as they are wisest.
Everywhere they are wisest.
They are the Magi.
They are the Magi.
Dear Editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says, if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant in his intellect as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus. You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus, but even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are, unseen and unseeable, in the world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus. Thank God he lives and lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood.
Far down in the forest, where the warm sun and the fresh air made a sweet resting place, grew a pretty little fir tree, and yet it was not happy. It wished so much to be tall like its companions, the pines and the firs which grew around it. The sun shone, and the soft air fluttered its leaves, and the little peasant children passed by, prattling merrily, but the fir tree heeded them not. Sometimes the children would bring a large basket of raspberries or strawberries, wreathed on a straw, and seat themselves near the fir tree and say, "Is it not a pretty little tree?" which made it feel more unhappy than before. And yet all this while the tree grew a notch or joint taller every year. For by the number of joints in the stem of a fir tree, we can discover its age. Still, as it grew, it complained, "Oh, how I wish I were as tall as the other trees. Then I would spread out my branches on every side, and my top would overlook the wide world. I should have the birds building their nests on my boughs, and when the wind blew, I should bow with stately dignity like my tall companions." The tree was so discontented that it took no pleasure in the warm sunshine, the birds, or the rosy clouds that floated over it morning and evening. Sometimes in winter, when the snow lay white and glittering on the ground, a hare would come springing along and jump right over the little tree, and then how mortified it would feel. 2 winters passed, and when the third arrived, the tree had grown so tall that the hare was obliged to run around it. Yet it remained unsatisfied, and would exclaim, "Oh, if I could but keep on growing tall and old! There is nothing else worth caring for in the world." In the autumn, as usual, the woodcutters came and cut down several of the tallest trees, and the young fir tree, which was now grown to its full height, shuddered as the noble trees fell to the earth with a crash. After the branches were lopped off, the trunks looked so slender and bare that they could scarcely be recognized. Then they were placed upon wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where were they going? What would become of them? The young fir tree wished very much to know, so in the spring, when the swallows and the storks came, it asked, "Do you know where those trees were taken? Did you meet them?" The swallows knew nothing, but the stork, after a little reflection, nodded his head and said, "Yes, I think I do. I met several new ships when I flew from Egypt, and they had fine moss that smelt like fir. I think these must have been the trees. I assure you, they were stately, very stately. Oh, how I wish I were tall enough to go on the sea, said the fir tree. What is the sea, and what does it look like? It would take too much time to explain, said the stalk, flying quickly away. Rejoice in thy youth, said the sunbeam. Rejoice in thy fresh growth and the young life that is in thee. And the wind kissed the tree, and the dew watered it with tears, but the fir tree regarded them not. Christmas time drew near, and many young trees were cut down, some even smaller and younger than the fir tree, who enjoyed neither rest nor peace with longing to leave its forest home. These young trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept their branches and were also laid on wagons and drawn by horses out of the forest. Where are they going? Asked the fir tree. They are not taller than I am. Indeed, one is much less. And why are the branches not cut off? Where are they going? We know, sang the sparrows. We have looked in at the windows of the houses in the town, and we know what is done with them. They are dressed up in the most splendid manner. We have seen them standing in the middle of a warm room, and adorned with all sorts of beautiful things, honey cakes, gilded apples, playthings, and many hundreds of wax tapers. And then, asked the fir tree, trembling through all its branches, and then what happens? We did not see any more, said the sparrows, but this was enough for us. I wonder whether anything so brilliant will ever happen to me, thought the fir tree. It would be much better than crossing the sea. I long for it almost with pain. Oh, when will Christmas be here? I am now as tall and well grown as those which were taken away last year. Oh, that I were now laid on the wagon, or standing in the warm room with all the brightness and splendor around me. Something better and more beautiful is to come after, or the trees would not be so decked out. Yes, what follows will be grander and more splendid. What can it be? I am weary with longing. I scarcely know how I feel. Rejoice with us, said the air and the sunlight. Enjoy thine own bright life in the fresh air. But the tree would not rejoice. Though it grew taller every day, and winter and summer, its dark green foliage might be seen in the forest, while passers-by would say, "What a beautiful tree!" A short time before Christmas, the discontented fir tree was the first to fall. As the axe cut through the stem, divided the pith, the tree fell with a groan to the earth, conscious of pain and faintness. And forgetting all of its anticipations of happiness, in sorrow at leaving its home in the forest, it knew that it should never again see its dear old companions, the trees, nor the little bushes and many-colored flowers that had grown by its side, perhaps not even the birds. Neither was the journey at all pleasant. The tree first recovered itself while being unpacked in the courtyard of a house with several other trees, and it heard a man say, "We only want one, and this is the prettiest." Then came two servants in grand livery and carried the fir tree into a large and beautiful apartment. On the walls hung pictures, and near the great stove stood great china vases, with lions on the lids. There were rocking chairs, silken sofas, large tables covered with pictures, books, and playthings worth a great deal of money. At least the children said so. Then the fir tree was placed in a large tub full of sand, but green bias hung all around it, so that no one could see it was a tub. and it stood on a very handsome carpet. How the fir tree trembled! What was going to happen to him now? Some young ladies came, and the servants helped them to adorn the tree. On one branch they hung little bags cut out of colored paper, and each bag was filled with sweetmeats. From other branches hung gilded apples and walnuts, as if they had grown there, and above and all around were hundreds of red, blue, and white tapers, which were fastened on the branches. Dolls exactly like real babies were placed under the green leaves. The tree had never seen such things before, and at the very top was fastened a glittering star made of tinsel. Oh, it was very beautiful. "This evening," they all exclaimed, "how bright it will be!" "Oh, that the evening were come," thought the tree, "and the tapers lighted, that I shall know what else is going to happen. Will the trees of the forest come to see me? I wonder if the sparrows will peep in the windows as they fly. Shall I grow faster here, and keep on all these ornaments summer and winter?" But guessing was of very little use. It made his bark ache, and this pain is as bad for a slender fir tree as headache is for us. At last the tapers were lighted, and then what a glistening blaze of light the tree presented. It trembled so with joy in all its branches that one of the candles fell among the green leaves and burnt some of them. "Help, help!" exclaimed the young ladies. But there was no danger, for they quickly extinguished the fire. After this, the tree tried not to tremble at all, though the fire frightened him. He was so anxious not to hurt any of the beautiful ornaments, even while their brilliancy dazzled him. And now the folding doors were thrown open, and a troop of children rushed in as if they intended to upset the tree. They were followed more silently by their elders. For a moment the little ones stood silent with astonishment, and then they shouted for joy till the room rang, and they danced merrily around the tree, while one present after another was taken from it. "What are they doing? What will happen next?" thought the fir. At last the candles burned down to the branches and were put out. Then the children received permission to plunder the tree. Oh, how they rushed upon it till the branches cracked, and had it not been fastened with the glistening star to the ceiling, it might have been thrown down. The children then danced about with the pretty toys, and no one noticed the tree, except the children's maid, who came and peeped among the branches to see if an apple or a fig had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, pulling a little fat man toward the tree. "No, now we shall be in the green shade," said the man, as he seated himself under it. "The tree will have the pleasure of hearing also, but I shall only relate one story. What shall it be? Iveda Aveda or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs but soon got up again and at last married a princess?" "Iveda Aveda," cried some. "Humpty Dumpty," cried others, and there was a fine shouting and crying out. But the fir tree remained quite still and thought to himself, "Shall I have anything to do with all this?" But he had already amused them as much as they wished. Then the old man told them the story of Humpty Dumpty, how he fell downstairs and was raised up again and married a princess. And the children clapped their hands and cried, "Tell another, tell another," for they wanted to hear the story of Iveda Aveda. But they only had Humpty Dumpty. After this the fir tree became quite silent and thoughtful. Never had the birds in the forest told such tales as Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet married a princess. "Ah, yes, so it happens in the world," thought the fir tree. He believed it all, because it was related by such a nice man. Ah, well, he thought, who knows? Perhaps I may fall down too and marry a princess. And he looked forward joyfully to the next evening, expecting to be again decked out with lights and playthings, gold and fruit. Tomorrow I will not tremble, thought he. I will enjoy all my splendor, and I shall hear the story of Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Iveda Aveda. And the tree remained quiet and thoughtful all night. In the morning the servants and the housemaid came in. Now, thought the fir, all my splendor is going to begin again. But they dragged him out of the room and upstairs to the garret, and threw him on the floor in a dark corner where no daylight shone, and there they left him. What does this mean? Thought the tree. What am I to do here? I can hear nothing in a place like this. And he had time enough to think, for days and nights passed, and no one came near him, and when at last somebody did come, it was only to put away large boxes in a corner. So the tree was completely hidden from sight, as if it never existed. It is winter now, thought the tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow, so that people cannot plant me. I shall be sheltered here, I dare say, until spring comes. How thoughtful and kind everybody is to me. Still, I wish this place were not so dark, as well as lonely, with not even a little hare to look at. How pleasant it was out in the forest while the snow lay on the ground, when the hare would run by, yes, and jump over me too, although I did not like it then. Oh, it is terribly lonely here. Squeak, squeak, said a little mouse, creeping cautiously toward the tree. Then came another, and they both sniffed at the fir tree and crept between the branches. Oh, it is very cold, said the little mouse, or else we should be so comfortable here, shouldn't we, you old fir tree? I am not old, said the fir tree. There are many others who are older than I am. Where do you come from, and what do you know? Asked the mice, who were full of curiosity. Have you seen the most beautiful places in the world, and can you tell us all about them? And have you been in the storeroom, where cheeses lie on the shelf and hams hang from the ceiling? One can run about on tallow candles there, and go in thin and come out fat. I know nothing of that place, said the fir tree, but I know the wood where the sun shines and the birds sing. And then the tree told the little mice all about its youth. They had never heard such an account in their lives, and after they listened to it attentively, they said, What a number of things you have seen! You must have been very happy. Happy, exclaimed the fir tree. And then, as he reflected upon what he had been telling them, he said, Ah, yes, after all, those were happy days. But when he went on and related all about Christmas Eve and how he had been dressed up with cakes and lights, the mouse said, How happy you must have been, you old fir tree. I am not old at all, replied the tree. I only came from the forest this winter. I am now checked in my growth. What splendid stories you can relate, said the little mice. And the next night 4 other mice came with them to hear what the tree had to tell. The more he talked, the more he remembered, and then he thought to himself, Those were happy days, but they may come again. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married the princess. Perhaps I may marry a princess too. And the fir tree thought of the pretty little birch tree that grew in the forest, which was to him a real beautiful princess. Who is Humpty Dumpty? Asked the little mice. And then the tree related the whole story. He could remember every single word, and the little mice were so delighted with it that they were ready to jump to the top of the tree. The next night, A great many more mice made their appearance, and on Sunday 2 rats came with them. But they said it was not a pretty story at all, and the little mice were very sorry, for it made them also think less of it. "Do you know only one story?" asked the rats. "Only one," replied the Fir Tree. "I heard it on the happiest evening of my life, but I did not know I was so happy at the time." "We think it is a very miserable story," said the rats. "Don't you know any story about bacon or tallow in the storeroom?" "No," replied the tree. "Many thanks to you, then," replied the rats, and they marched off. The little mice also kept away after this, and the tree sighed and said, "It was very pleasant when the merry little mice sat round me and listened while I talked. Now that is all past too. However, I shall consider myself happy when someone comes to take me out of this place." But would this ever happen? Yes. One morning, people came to clear out the garret. The boxes were packed away, and the tree was pulled out of the corner and thrown roughly on the garret floor. Then the servant dragged it out upon the staircase where the daylight shone. "Now life is beginning again," said the tree, rejoicing in the sunshine and fresh air. Then it was carried downstairs and taken into the courtyard so quickly that it forgot to think of itself and could only look about. There was so much to be seen. The court was close to a garden where everything looked blooming. Fresh and fragrant roses hung over the little palings. The linden trees were in blossom, while the swallows flew here and there, crying, "Twit, twit, twit, my mate is coming." But it was not the Fir Tree they meant. "Now I shall live," cried the tree, joyfully spreading out its branches, but alas, they were all withered and yellow, and it lay in a corner amongst weeds and nettles. The star of gold paper still stuck in the top of the tree and glittered in the sunshine. In the same courtyard, 2 of the merry children were playing who had danced around the tree at Christmas and had been so happy. The youngest saw the gilded star and ran and pulled it off the tree. "Look what is sticking to the ugly old Fir Tree," said the child, treading on the branches till they cracked under his boots. And the tree saw all the fresh, bright flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished it had remained in the dark corner of the garret. It thought of its fresh youth in the forest, of the merry Christmas evening, and of the little mice who had listened to the story of Humpty Dumpty. "Past, past," said the old tree. "Oh, had I but enjoyed myself while I could have done so, but now it is too late." Then a lad came and chopped the tree in small pieces, till a large bundle lay in a heap on the ground. The pieces were placed in a fire under the copper, and they quickly blazed up brightly, while the tree sighed so deeply that each sigh was like a pistol shot. Then the children who were at play came and seated themselves in front of the fire and looked at it and cried, "Pop, pop." But at each pop, which was a deep sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer day in the forest, and of Christmas evening, and of Humpty Dumpty, the only story it had ever heard or knew how to relate, till at last it was consumed. The boys still played in the garden, and the youngest wore the golden star on his breast with which the tree had been adorned during the happiest evening of its existence. Now all was past. This tree's life was past, and the story also, for all stories must come to an end at last.
'Twas the night after Christmas, and all through the house not a creature is stirring, not even a mouse. The presents are scattered and broken, I fear, and St. Nicholas won't come again for a year. The children are nestled all snug in their wee little beds, while memories of sugar plums dance in their wee little heads. Mama in her kerchief and Pa in his cap are settled at last for a long winter's nap.